Hello, this is Dan Pro. Welcome back to part 5 of my train rigging tutorial series. And we just have a few more things to clean up here. So I've actually went ahead and added a few bones like before, and I've actually parented some meshes to it. So there's a few things we can do to make these a little bit better. I've actually also went ahead and done all my parenting. So basically all of these bones are parented to the main engine bone, and all of the stuff on the rear here for all these other moving parts are parented to the car main bone. So pretty simple. Like I mentioned, I already added the meshes to it, but when we swing a door out like this, you can see I can swing it right through the tank of the engine, and that's not very good. So I'm going to start with the limit type constraints first. That's going to help us before we get to our action constraints. So let's just get in here and limit this bone. So we can't swing it inside too far, and we can't swing it too far out. So we know that 0 is going to be good, and it looks like about 90 degrees here. Let me see, what am I in here? I've got radians set. Let me go back to degrees. So if I go to about 90 degrees, that should be about the limit that I want that to rotate out before it starts intersecting that door. So let's just add a limit constraint. We do our ZZ negative, our ZZ 90. Let's add a limit constraint to this. We'll go to our bone constraints panel, add bone constraints. We will do limit rotation. Now, first thing I want to do is change from world space to local space, and I'm going to check this transform box. I'll tell you what this does here in a little bit. Now, this bone doesn't rotate on its x-axis at all, or its y-axis. It only works on the z, so we can just leave the minimum and max 00 for x and y, and we know we need to go from 0 to 90, so we'll just change this to 90, and then enable this checkbox. And now, when we rotate it, it's going to stop between 0 and 90 on its z-axis. So we don't get the mesh intersections there. Very easy for an animator to just clear the rotations out, close the door, and it won't go inside either. So very nice. What this transform box checkbox does, if I rotate this out to 90 degrees, if I uncheck it, you'll notice that I can still keep rotating this out past that 90 degrees, and it's still recording it up in the transform box, but it's still stopping at 90 degrees like the limit rotation says, the limits we put in there. So I always recommend you check this just so you don't have that recording those extra transforms. So that's what that for transform box does. So that was actually pretty simple. What I'm going to do for this first action constraint is I'm going to set up this window control. I've called this bone up here window control. I just need to figure out how I want this to control all 4 of these windows. Now I actually have these meshes set up already, parented to different window bones. You can see window 001.r and 2, and then I have the right and left sides as well. So I can actually slide these out past where I want them to. I'm not going to use a limit type constraint with this though. I did lock all the non-essential axes and transforms, so it's only going to use for location on its y-axis. And the reason it's y-axis here is, remember, the bones, the 2 points on the bones, that's always going to be the long axis of the bone is always the y-axis. So obviously not needed for scale, not needed for rotation in this instance. Alright, so let's get back to my control here. You see, if I just do GY and drag this, I think I want to, when I move this from the 0 position, its local y 0 position, to negative about 1.5, I think. I want to automatically open up all of these, so we're going to use the action constraint to do that. So let's actually set up a limit location on our control bone first. Now we're not moving on X or Z, so we can leave these at 0. We can change this to local. Now you notice that bone popped down here. This is why we want to use local space, not world space. So alright, so negative 1.5, we'll put that on the minimum, and our maximum of 0, and we'll just check these boxes on, and now our control is only going to go here. But now we need to set up our action constraint to control these other bones to automatically make them go open up when we move this all the way across to the open position. And I didn't click transform. There we go. For transform, very important to put that on there. So what we need to do is create an action. Now I already have an action on this armature, and it's just simply this bone keyed to rotate around over 30 frames. So I'm going to disconnect this action temporarily. Always make sure when you're disconnecting an action, especially if you want to keep it, that you have this F, which stands for fake user, enabled, just to make sure that Blender will not delete that data block. So if your data blocks that are not being used, that's how Blender gets rid of extra data, is if it doesn't have a user, it will, you save your file and you close it down, it's going to get rid of it. So always make sure if you see this F by any other property, you'll see it over in textures and materials as well, also images and things like that. Make sure you click that on. So I'm going to disconnect that just so I don't lose my drive animation, and I'm going to create a new action. By the way, I'm in an action editor, which is a sub editor of the dope sheet. You'll notice here's the dope sheet editor, and we can change it to action. So I'll just click new, and let's name this AC for action constraint, and window. Alright, so what I need to do is key. When this control is in its zeroed out position, I want all these windows closed, so I want to add a keyframe for that. So I'm going to insert a single keyframe on the Y location for all of these on frame 1. Oops, there we go. So I have an animation that does nothing. Alright, let's go up 10 frames to frame 11, and I'm going to take this, let me just get the side view here. I'm going to go to wireframe here. I'm going to use the old calibrated eye. So GY, let me drag this up to kind of line these windows up here, and I'm going to keyframe this at frame 10. Let me drag this one up to GY, and I'm just using, again, just want to line up that window there, and I will keyframe this as well. Now that I have these set, let me just do copy and paste to the other side so I can keyframe these as well. Now what makes that work is I actually have these bones named right and left, so I could use the copy and paste mirror for that. So now I have an animation. Let me go back to solid mode here. Let's get back to our textures. So I have an animation that's going to open this window between frame 1 and 11. One other thing we need to do is, if we go to our graph editor, you'll notice, let me just zoom in here really quick with the period key, we've got an ease in and ease out. Now we actually don't want that, because then the animator would have to actually animate against that ease in and ease out if they didn't want it. So let's go back to dope sheet. I'm going to select all of these keys and then type T and change those keys to linear, and now they'll open in a linear fashion instead of using the Bezier curve, so we're no ease in and ease out on those keyframes. Alright, now that this action is set, we can disconnect it from our armature. So let's click the fake user here just to make sure we never lose it, in case we have to shut down our Blender for a while, or if it crashes on us or something. And now let's set up our action constraint. So this is the control, so this is going to be our target. Let's select one of these window bones and add bone constraint action. So we need to find a rig, which is train rig, and this bone, which is control window. Get back to this here. That's our control bone. That's our target. Let's type win, and we'll get window control. So now we have the bone that's going to control this action. Let's pick our AC Windows action, and we're using the, remember, the Y location here. So let's change this to Y location, and we want local space, and the minimum is 0 to the maximum of -1.5. So what the minimum does, that's going to correspond to frame 1 of our animation, and the maximum is the transform that's going to correspond with the end of our animation. In this case, we keyframed all those values on frame 11. So now if I move this, you'll notice it pulls this one with it. and we get to the end of the animation. So basically from 0 to negative 1.5, it is playing this action and all the keys. It's just doing the interpolation between this value here. So just put that back. Now we just need to make it do it on the other 4, or the other 3 rather. So I'm going to select these window bones, and selecting this one last to make it the active one, I'm again going to use the copy attributes add-on that comes standard with Blender. You just need to go to user preferences and enable it in add-ons. So Control C gives me the copy attributes menu, and I'm going to use the copy selected constraints. In this case, I only have this action constraint that I want to copy to those other 3 bones. I'll just click this and then OK, and now I don't have to fill in this 3 more times. It's all already set up for me. Make sure everything's cleared out here, and let's just grab our control and see what it does. Now this is what I meant. If we wanted to slow in on the windows opening and then speed up and then slow back down, now it's on the control, not keyframed on these bones themselves, so you don't have to keyframe this fast. If you wanted a linear motion, you'd have to keyframe this fast and then slow it and then speed it back in. So I hope that makes sense. That's why you don't want keyframes that are not linear in your actions. Alright, so that was actually pretty easy, and I hope it's easy to understand as well. So again, just to run through what we're doing here, this is the control, and we're using the Y location transforms in local space between 0 and negative 1.5, and it's just playing this AC Windows action. It's doing the interpolation between frame 1 and frame 11. So when it's at 0, it's the keyframes are frame 1, and when it's at negative 1.5, we are using the keyframes at frame 11. So I hope that makes sense. Let me do one more here, and hopefully if I've lost you, you can regain control here, and we'll use a different transform here in this case. So for this control, I've got a break. I'm going to rotate it backwards, and I think 90 degrees. So from 0 to negative 90 degrees. That's going to be my control action. Let's just add a limit rotation constraint to it, and I can actually lock everything but X here. So I can just limit Y and Z to 0 to 0, make sure we're in local space for transform, and now we're going to limit between 0 and, oops, I need to go negative 90 and 0. Now let me rotate this. Alright, so now we got our control working. Let's set up our action. Let's add a new action. Again, we'll just call AC underscore break. Now what I'm going to do for this is keyframe all of these breaks to rotate to clamp down correctly, and I'm also going to rotate this brake wheel, so if it spins around 3 times, because it's quite a bit of, I would imagine that there needs to be some mechanical force here, so I'm going to just do 3 times around, and then they're going to 3 times around up here will make these close to their final position. So let's keyframe all this stuff here. Keyframe the X rotation of this brake here, 0, insert single keyframe, and I'm just going to repeat this because when the brake is in its default spot, we want our brakes to be not braking, and we want this not to be rotated, and that's the Z axis here, so insert single keyframes. So alright, now I've got all the bones that I need already, the 4 brakes and this brake wheel. Let's go frame 10, or frame 11 rather, so we're 10 frames ahead, and I'm going to take the rotation here. Let me actually clear these keyframes. Let me go back. I only want a single. Insert single. Alright, there we go. So I want to spin it around 3 times, so I'm going to take 360 times 3 right in my transforms, and then insert a keyframe, insert single keyframe. So you see when I scrub this back and forth, it's going to spin around 3 times. And let's see here, think RXX, what is the value? I think it's 6 degrees. So it'd be 6 degrees on this one, -6 on this one. Yeah, I better insert a keyframe. So insert single, insert single. This one needs to be 6 degrees to clamp down fully, and this one needs to be -6. Alright, so now we have our animation, and just like before, you'll notice that when this spins around, these are just going to slowly clamp up. Before, we want to grab all these keyframes and type T and change them to linear. And we have our action set. Let's just hit fake user and disconnect it from our armature and set up this control bone to play these actions. Let me just pick one of them here. I'll just set it up on one bone and just pick this one up here. I'm going to add an action constraint. Actually, let me do it with the hotkey here. So we know that's the control, that's the target. And I'm going to shift select this one, control shift C, and we will add action. That fills out my target information. I just need to pick my break action, local space, and we want X rotation. Now remember, we're rotating this backwards, so we're going to go from 0 to -90, and it's going to play the animation between frame 1 and frame 11. Now let's just rotate this back and see if this spins, which it should. Now we can copy this action constraint to these other bones, so we'll just select them first, grab these breaks, and make this the active one, and do Control C, again copy attributes, copy selected constraints, action, OK. And here we go. We've got, spin that brake wheel and it'll clamp down on those wheels. So pretty cool. Love the action constraints. It's so you can do a lot of cool things with it. I've actually done a lot of mechanical rigging with just the actual action constraint. So before I really understood how to use the IK constraints and transform constraints and things like that, this action constraint was a lifesaver because it was something I was used to doing in another program. So if you can keyframe, you can use an action constraint. There you go. So I won't go through and add limits to all these other things. Another thing about action constraint, just another thing that makes it cool. So you can see that if I grab this window control and move it forward and open up these other ones, we still have control over these other window bones. So we won't lose control, and we don't have to do the parenting trick where you have to, what you'd have to do with a copy location or a rotation, because you would lose control over a bone, and you don't do that with action constraints. You don't lose control over your bones. So I hope that makes sense. If you've done a lot of rigging, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where you lose control. You have to have a bone copy a rotation, and now you can't rotate it. You have to add another bone to it, parent it to that, and then, you know, it's always 3 times the bones that you should need. Anyways, that I think is the final part of this train rig. I might do an amendment later, but just to kind of finish this up, let's get back to changing to this drive wheel here, because I'm going to show you how to make the train translate forward. It's actually pretty easy. So I already have a drive wheel action. I'm just going to make a copy of it by hitting the plus, and I just want to keyframe one more thing here. So we know that this is just rotating this around once between frame 1 and 30. Now we've already done the math for this, so we know how far we need to translate this forward in order to keep up with the rotations. If you remember back in part 2, I believe, let's go to our text editor. We got our wheel math here. We know that the circumference of this is 4.40108 meters. So we know if we translate the engine forward 4.4018 meters, that is going to be 1 rotation. So we're just going to match this up here and make our train go off the map. So let me get back to, see, dope sheet here. So I've already got the keyframes for the rotation. Now I just need to keyframe our location. So it needs to be the Y location of this bone. So that's the local axis of our engine bone. I'm just going to do insert single keyframe. Let's go to frame 30, and what was that? We'll do negative 4.4108 and insert single keyframe. I want to take these and make them linear, and we can translate forward, but then it stops at frame 30. But pretty easy fix. Let's select this and go to our graph editor. So we've got our, let me select all these keys here, see if I can zoom in here. This is our rotation. Let's add a modifier, cycles, and let's select our Y location. Let me just turn this off here. Zoom into this so we can actually see it. And add a modifier, cycles, but this time, instead of just cycling, what we want to do is change the repeat to repeat with offset. And there we go. Now we can have an infinite running train. Now I've only got my frames set to 29, but if I just extend my frames out to 200, I can drive off into the sunset. Now I actually parented the track to the root bone here and added an array modifier so I can make that track as long as I wish. So that's it. I hope you learned something in this tutorial and it helps you with your mechanical rigs. And let me know if you've done something, especially if you upload it into BlendSwap so I can check it out. Till next time, good luck.